2015 Washougal City Council Workshop meeting. Rose, could you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Booger.
Here.
Councilmember Wagner.
Here.
Councilmember Greenlee.
Here.
Councilmember Shoemaker.
Here.
Councilmember Lindsay.
Here.
Councilmember McDaniel. Councilmember Freeman.
Thank you. We know Councilmember Freeman is in the building. Councilmember McDaniel will not be here this evening. First item on the agenda are public comments. Good evening.
Want me?
Pardon? Right up by the microphone, right over here.
I'm Ron Danielson, live in Hillsboro, Oregon, one of the owners of the Washougal Mobile Home Park, Gibbons Creek, down the street here. The letter there, I came in and talked to the city council a year ago.
Sure.
And what we do is for the sewer rates and the water rates, we just pass that on to the tenants, whatever you guys are charging us. And on the sewer rates, it's a flat amount. And so we have been getting charged at the single family residential for all of the tenants, and so we're asking if we could get changed over to multifamily. We think that that would be a fairer way that our tenants are charged, and that would it go from right now it's 75. Well, it's 113.20 that we're being charged every other month, and it would go to 75.79 based on what your charges are right now. So it is a substantial amount. It is low-income housing, most of it, and we think that that would be fair since we are multifamily. What we've done to try to do our part and everything, the last year we've worked very hard on getting the water use down. Of course, what we had been doing was prorating the water, and of course when you're just one of 161, it's not that important to fix the toilet or to do this or that or the other thing, or not wash your car 3 times a day or whatever. And so we have just finished with going to submetering, and in July 1 will be the first billing to the tenants based on their water usage, and it'll be from May 15 to June 15. And what we've seen at other parks that we've done that, the water consumption's dropped like 30% plus, and that's what we expect to see here. So we're doing everything we can to try to protect our natural resource water. It's very precious, and we're doing everything we can to try to encourage the tenants to be frugal and try to save that. So, but we were thinking, the sewer, to get that to multifamily, I think that's what we're talking about this evening. That would be the fairest way for our tenants to pay. We have all the infrastructure of the sewer system and everything on the property that we take care of the maintenance and replacement and all that kind of stuff, and so the city doesn't have a lot of charges. With the water meter, we read it, we maintain the water meters in the water system, and so that's why I think multifamily, why they get a break, is because you don't have a lot of infrastructure and things that you have to pay for. So we just like to be switched over to multifamily. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Ron. Stay tuned. I think you'll like one of the recommendations that's in today's presentation.
Thank you.
You bet. Seeing no other members of the public, we'll go to new business, Public Works Cost of Service update. Trevor.
Thank you, Mayor.
Karen, welcome.
Thank you.
You've got a new face at the table, too.
Yes.
We do. Tonight joining us from FCS Group is Karen Johnson and Courtney Black. I started a working relationship with Karen in 2007 and early 2008. Our first rate analysis update and really the initiative or the kickoff of a cost of service study. And so really over an 8-year period and 2 rate analysis updates and first phase of the cost of service brings us to today's update. And we've had extensive correspondence with Courtney as well over the last several months. Our last touch, I believe, where we received additional guidance and direction was April of last year. And so this is of fruition from that guidance dating back almost a year ago. Thank you. And thank you for coming down.
Yeah. You want me just to jump right in?
Sure.
Okay. So the purpose of today's workshop is to, first I want to give a little bit of an overview of the whole rate study process. The benefit, as Trevor has said, we've been looking at this over a number of years, and so just kind of wanted to recap what we've done, and for the benefit of any new council members that haven't gone through this process with us, I'll give a quick recap of the historical work that we've completed to date. Present the updated sewer rate findings and results from the previous presentations, policy direction. Then we also want to discuss the trailer park rate classification issue, and then request your policy input in any direction for future analysis. So the first thing, looking at a rate study, has 3 major components. It has a revenue requirement forecast, and that's where you're looking at what's the percentage increase needed in total utility revenues. So not looking at what individual customer classes would pay, but what the utility in total needs for revenues in order to fund the capital programs, the ongoing operating and maintenance costs, and making sure the utility has appropriate cash reserves. The second phase is a cost of service analysis. That's looking at equity between the different customer classes on your system. Single-family, residential, multifamily, commercial, for example, are the types of customers you have on your system, and looking for recovering the needed costs as equitably as possible between those classes. And then finally, the design of the rate structure itself is looking at equity within the customer classes. So what's the structure that you're using to collect from all the individual customers within the customer classes that they fall in, with the goal, of course, being implementing best practice rate structures trends over the last several years, kind of what we're working towards on that. So first, looking at a historical recap of what we've been doing over the last couple of years, and focusing on the sewer rate study findings. We've accomplished for the water utility and the sewer utility implementing the system-wide revenue increases, and we've done the water utility cost of service analysis and rate design, and that's all been adopted and approved and in place now. So what we're focusing on is the sewer rate study findings. During our initial work, we found that there were some pretty significant impacts for bringing things in line with cost of service that needed some phase-in strategies and a longer-term look. So we've been working on that over the past year. To kind of recap what our initial findings were, is that the single-family and multifamily classes are paying more than their indicated cost of service. The commercial class as a whole is paying less than its indicated share of cost of service. And part of the reasons for that imbalance between single-family and commercial is that the current commercial rate structure doesn't really correlate well with what we're finding the actual water use of the commercial customers to be. So your current sewer rate structure is a flat rate per residential unit based on the type of business. So there'd be a rate for residential, and then there are rates for commercial on whether you're a restaurant or a motel, and so on. And it's not based on what your actual water usage, which is assumed to be what you're contributing into the sewer system. And so kind of bringing both of those, what we'd call best practices, in line, caused significant variations between customer bills within your commercial class. And so moving to that volume-based rate structure immediately just had wide swings for your individual commercial classes. And so we're looking at how we can mitigate those impacts, but again, move towards that best practice over time. Again, a quick recap of what those results were in actual analytical results is single-family residential, multifamily residential, and commercial. We have in total for the utility, and we looked at this for 2018. That's the last year of the current rate study to give an idea of where you are today versus where each class should be by 2018. And you can see that revenue under existing rates is currently about $3.8 million in total, and that would be going to about $3.9 million by 2018. And what that represents is over to the right, you see there's a 4% total increase there. That's the current adopted revenue requirement increase in the sewer utility. There's a 2% increase proposed for 2017 and another 2% proposed for 2018. And what we're looking at is the sewer utility as a whole needs to increase by 4%, but if you look at the individual customer classes, it shows that single-family and multifamily should actually have a reduction in their rates, about 4.5% for single-family and just under 10% for multifamily, where you can see that commercial needs to have nearly 100% rate increase to get in line with what the analysis indicates they should be paying. We can kind of take a further look at that and seeing why that disparity is in place on this bottom table. If you look at what we call a unit cost analysis, where we're looking at taking the total revenues and dividing it by the total water usage of the system, what's the unit cost of the system, and then comparing that to the individual customer classes. You can see on that bottom line where it says combined system unit cost, it's about $7.56 for the total sewer utility. And you can see that single family and multiple family are paying a little bit more than that, or in the, kind of in the $8 range, whereas the commercial unit cost is they're currently only paying in the $4 range. So they're paying significantly less than your residential customers, and that's where it's a little bit out of bounds on that. And so we're looking to improve that situation. So when we were back in one of our early presentations, when the water rate increases were put into effect, the policy direction at the time was, in the near term, let's just maintain the existing rate structure for the sewer utility and implement the proposed utility-wide rate increases, just so to make sure that you're getting the revenues that you needed for the utility. So what was adopted at that time is there was no increases needed for 2014 through 2016, and the analysis showed a need for a 2% increase in 17 and then another one in 18, and then to come back to you with some additional alternatives on how we might phase into the improvements to that commercial class structure over time. So what was adopted, and again, a lot of numbers on this page, but I just wanted to show this is your existing rate structures now, showing those rate increases without making the improvements to the customer classes or the rate structure changes. So you can see we have a residential, their first unit is $113, and then each additional unit is $75. So that kind of explains the situation we were just referring to on single-family mobile homes versus trailer parks. You can see the trailer park down there is also paying the same rate as the single-family residential. And then commercial, rather than having it based on usage, which has been kind of the current trend in the industry for the past 10-plus years, is the utilities have been moving away from a flat rate structure for commercial to actually basing it on water usage. So that's kind of where the utility got out of bounds on that 98% kind of differential in commercial, is just the nature of having this kind of what I would consider an outdated structure for commercial sewer. And so working towards making those improvements. So what we're looking at, instead of having varying flat rates based on the type of business, is looking at the actual metered water usage of the customers and charging based on that analysis. So I just wanted to give a little bit of a history of where this is where your current rate structures are.
Just go back to that slide for
Sure.
just a second. It looks like restaurants, and is that sewer assisted living? Do you mean senior?
Senior.
Okay. Kind of interesting.
Little typo.
Yeah. RV units and single family outside the city. Those are the only ones paying more than the residential.
It's kind of on a per unit basis, so the rate itself is lower, but it depends on how many units you apply it to. For example, the schools are per employee or student, and the businesses per employee, where that really doesn't have any particular correlation to how much that business uses and contributes to the sewer system. So that's kind of where they're out of balance. Is it's just not really correlated to how the customers use your sewer system. And again, it was a very common structure. Historically, predominantly started with like sewer districts when they didn't have water usage data available. They crafted these types of sewer rate structures, and the trend over the last years is just kind of moving away from that and actually saying, what are you really contributing to the sewer system, and charging based on that.
And the underlying rate's going to be based on just like a commercial classification?
Yes, it would just,
Or are we going to, I believe that in some places they can tie the rate to the water usage.
and that's essentially what we'd be looking at doing here, is there would just be a commercial class called commercial. So whether you are a motel or a restaurant or a school, it's just you're in the commercial class. And the structure would consist of a base charge, so a monthly charge that's going to include some amount of usage allowance, and then a volume rate that's applied to your actual water usage. So the purpose of using water usage is sewer flow is not actually measured at the utility, except for some of the metered industrial customers. And so water usage is used as a proxy for, this
Right.
is how much water you use. It's
Really, it's very
assumed.
expensive to meter sewer.
Yes, pretty expensive, and so, where we see that is for maybe your large industrial customers, sometimes are monitored, who have really high strength. Sometimes they'll get metered, because that's usually a pretty small percentage of the customer base. So the common approach in sewer utilities is to base it on actual water usage for each of the commercial, because that's measured and actual. So instead of just guessing based on your number of students, for example, you're looking at actual real metered water usage. So that's the intent there. So what we have found.
Senior assisted living is going to get quite a hit.
Senior
Not really.
assisted living.
Well, these are the
Uh,
existing
from the
rates.
Yeah, these are the existing rates. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it really depends on how much water they're using compared to what your current rate kind of demonstrates that they would be using. Again, and it's just a really big spread between individual customers.
What do you do about large industrial users that depend on water? I'm thinking of Pendleton, Exterior Wood, and places like that.
Those are based off of our industrial rates, not off commercial rates.
Yep.
So
They're not-
theirs
they're
is
not part of
measured.
this.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're not part of this analysis.
Oh, there's another
Because we heard from-
Industrial.
Yeah, it's the big,
Industrial.
the monitored industrial
Okay.
classes. I
We heard
think
from
you have
Charlie
meters.
Bishop before that he's running right at the margin, and the increase in water could drive him elsewhere. That's 138 jobs right there.
Right. So this is about the sewer, not the water.
Okay?
And then the footnote on the slide is kind of there to remind us all that industrial is not part of this analysis for sewer. It's single-family, multifamily, and commercial.
But sewer and water are related, because when you use a lot of water, it gets washed down the sewer.
Correct.
Sometimes.
Right, and that's what she's saying, that's what we're looking to move to. This slide is early in the presentation, there's a lot more slides to go. This slide is just here to show us, to remind us and ground us, this is what we currently do. And as you can see, it's an outdated approach that is not correlable to best practice in the industry, which is billing based on flow and usage. It's just some flat rate that we have. So it's just illustrative of that.
What's the determinant for industrial versus commercial? Is it number of people or for the rates?
You likely have a code description of the definition of motor, but it's generally a manufacturing process type business.
Okay.
I'm trying to,
Any comment further on
I'm
that,
trying to,
Trevor?
I'm trying to recall your actual code language.
Yeah, so there's industrial discharge language. We actually have industrial sewer language within the municipal code based on the meter size and then the type of strengths that are discharged. And that goes into a separate analysis as far as what the actual impacts are to not only the collection system, but the wastewater treatment plant. So we have the Pendleton Woolen Mills and Exterior Woods, BBA nonwoven down the industrial park.
So their output sewage system is actually larger, is that?
It's unique, and so
Okay.
it has a different formula
Okay.
that's applied. And many of those make their way through the chief wastewater operator for review on a monthly basis, because many of those customers actually hold their own MPDS permits, their pollution discharge elimination permits like we do for our wastewater plant. So there's specific criteria that they have to meet before they can even discharge to our collection system to make sure that we don't have impacts to our treatment process. Does that make sense?
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
I was just wondering what would bump a certain commercial over the edge to industrial. If
So when they apply, depending on what the applied use is and the amount of discharge that they're proposing,
So it's the amount of discharge then,
Yeah,
that would?
the amount and the strength.
Okay.
So if there's a
All
high,
right.
like BOD or suspended solids, then it's going
Okay.
to take a separate
All
formula
right.
to find out exactly what those impacts are. The commercial accounts we're speaking of today are not those specific
Right.
industrial accounts.
BOD, biological oxygen demand.
And again, those are not part of the analysis that FCS is
Right,
bringing today.
I think the short answer is, we know what's industrial and we know what's commercial. There isn't an easy way to say industrial, commercial, but our code covers it, and so we know what to do, and we know which ones are which.
Okay, so then what the longer-term strategy is, the ultimate goal is to recover the utility costs from customers reasonably consistent with how they place demands on the system. That's what kind of the whole fair, equitable consideration is. We're going to be maintaining the flat rate charges for the residential customers, which is generally consistent with industry practice. There are some utilities that also charge a volume-based sewer rate for your residential customers, but it's still more common that they're based on a flat rate, with just commercial being charged on the volume rate. So again, then we're going to be eliminating what we're considering a complex commercial flat rate structure and charging them based on the water use, again consistent with industry practice. So this is the strategy that we're moving forward to, some different alternatives on how to get there. So as we mentioned before, the commercial customers are currently paying less than their share of the cost of service. In addition, we have kind of an outdated rate structure that we're going to be changing. So there's two issues on commercial that we're trying to improve on. And so the combination of those two things, the cost of service shifts of them needing a 98% increase to get in line with cost of service, and then changing from the flat rate to a rate based on volume, is what's just caused a lot of just wide fluctuations of ranges in the bills, and why we're looking for alternatives to present to you to kind of smooth out those impacts to the extent practical. What we're looking to do then is, so the challenge is, when we move to the ultimate rate structure of a base charge and a volume charge, all of your commercial customers would be paying the same volume charge, let's just say $1. And so you have customers coming from several different flat rates right now. So you have a bunch of disparate flat rates trying to converge all to the same uniform rate. And that's what's causing all the wide ranges. So even though the commercial class as a whole is paying less than its cost of service, within that class you have commercial customers that are paying less than or more than. So just a lot of variation in there, and so we're looking for phase-in strategies to kind of move to that kind of an end game. It is going to come with a little bit of administrative burden because you're looking at phasing in over time, so it's not just a one-time quick fix, and just kind of customer understanding of, how am I going from this flat rate to getting to this volume rate, and all the unique different customer classes that you have are kind of difficult to state really simplistically into a rate schedule. So kind of some challenges from that standpoint. So back in April, which was the last time I was here to present, we looked at two scenarios. The first scenario, we applied the uniform rate increase for all customer classes and phased in commercial rate structure change over 4 years, and then postponed the cost of service adjustments for the next study period. So everyone got the cumulative 4% rate increase regardless of customer class, and so the real focus was just on changing the commercial rate structure, so not implementing the cost of service findings. The second scenario was to accomplish both within the 4-year period, to phase into the cost of service shifts as well as make the rate structure changes for the commercial class and have all of that fully implemented by 2018. So we were considering that a 4-year rate strategy. What that looked like for scenario 1, again, you can see everyone to the far right, everyone is getting the same 4% increase. Single family and multifamily, we're getting 2% increases both in 2017 and 18. And then we started the phase-in strategy for the commercial customers. So we were just going to smooth that out, starting them at 1% increases per year. So that's the increase of the commercial class as a whole under this option. So again, only paying 4% more than what they currently were as a class as a whole. Whereas the second option, scenario 2, where we were also going to build in the cost of service changes, we had them increasing at 18.5% per year to get up to that about that 98% thing. And then we also, you can see on the top two lines, we've reduced the single family and multifamily over time. So what the goal of this scenario was to have everyone fully in line with cost of service by 2018, as well as having the commercial rate structure changed. So what we came forward with in April was a look at these bills, and so scenario one, this is where we're not looking at cost of service, just fixing the rate structure change. You can see that there's just a wide range of bill impacts. The green line at the largest, so nearly half of the customers in the commercial class were going to have a reduction in their bill, somewhere between 25 and 50%. So a large portion of them reducing, and then a portion of them having anywhere from a 0 to a 5% increase all the way up to significant percentage increases. So just a really wide range of impacts there. Scenario two, where we looked at implementing cost of service as well, even pushes those increases up higher. So now the majority of your commercial customers are going to have increases under that scenario, with still some really wide ranges of some pretty high percentage increases in the 4-year period. So what we came back from the last presentation was the council's policy direction to extend that phase-in strategy. So instead of 4 years, let's look at phasing it in over a longer period of time. So we were just going to do the 4% uniform increase to all the classes, and then phase into the commercial rate structure fixes at about a 50% improvement, so achieving 50% of the target by 2018. With the plan then in the next rate study update, we would continue that phase-in strategy and get the commercial rate structure fully implemented by 2022. So really the only difference between the first scenario we looked at last time and this one is extending the phase-in period from 2018 to 2022 to see if we could mitigate those wide swings in the customer bill impacts. And then subsequently, we were requested to look at another scenario, which is where we maintain the residential classes at their existing rates and apply the total rate increase needs to commercial and phase them into 50%. So the difference here is where previously we were looking at increasing everyone the 2% or reducing single family and multifamily to meet cost of service. Here we're saying, well, cost of service shows that residential classes should have a decrease. So instead of increasing them, let's at least keep them at their existing rates and move a little bit closer to cost of service in this current study period, and then continue to make improvements going forward. So that's kind of the change of this one. Again, the same concept of getting the commercial rate structure about at 50% of its target during the current study period of 2018, and then the plan to finish it out by 2020. So that's kind of a long historical recap, but we've been back quite a few times of looking at that, so I just wanted to make sure that we brought it all kind of up to date with what we've looked at, and so where we're going forward. I'm going to turn it over now to Courtney, who's going to walk through the details of our current technical analysis, and then we can kind of wrap up from there.
So over the last year, as we've continued to look at these commercial rates and extend to 2022, there's been a few changes besides that. We've taken this opportunity to look at each of the individual customer impacts, and staff has identified, the data has aged a few years, so a few customers, 30 about, had updated usage. And so in terms of comparing back to before, we have some more specific data and some of the accounts have changed. Besides that, the industrial accounts, we had the measured flows for their industrial use, but they also have bathrooms and such, and they have sewer use. And so we had charges for those accounts, but we didn't yet have volume data, which we now have industrial and commercial sewer volume data to charge them as well. And those were a significant piece of the usage as well, the total commercial usage. And then also, as we've continued to look at additional scenario options for you, we're in 2015, and so we've adjusted the analysis to recognize that we're phasing in at a mid-year point here. Karen described option one. This is the uniform rate increase. And so if you look to the far right again, all classes are increasing by the 4%. Again, you've already seen residential classes starting in 2017 and in 2018. But for commercial, in order to phase in the structure, we begin their increase in 2015. The way this differs from what was presented in April is that we're only achieving, as it was noted, 50% of the target of moving from the fixed charges in commercial to the volume-based structure by 2018. And so that has reduced some of the impacts of the phase-in. We're getting halfway by the end of this period. This is what the rates would look like for option one. And so as you can see, the residential rates, the structure hasn't changed. You can see that for single-family residential at the top, that current $113 you recognize. And then in 2017, you can see the 2% rate increase begin to take effect, and then again in 2018. And that's the case for all of the non-commercial above the line there. And then the way to represent the commercial rates below the line, while we are phasing in, the base charge is uniform for all customers. So each account in 2015 would pay the $35.09, and they would get 800 cubic feet included with that. And then when you look at the $4.29 as the volume rate, that's an average for the system. And what is unique about the rate structure is each customer will have a unique volume rate that will either be higher or lower than the $4.29 that will get them to their targeted bill that's phasing them to a uniform volume rate by the end of our phase-in. So by 2018, if you look at the volume rate in that last column, 2018, $4.38. We still have not achieved a uniform volume rate yet. Everyone still has a unique volume rate, but by 2022, the number you will see in there for a volume rate will be uniform and applied to all customers, and that's the target that we're going towards. So 2018, again, is a 50% achievement of that. And you can see also, note here that the allowance is also phasing in as well. It's 1,000 cubic feet in 2018, and we're phasing into 14. So this is probably the most, the slide that best illustrates the equity issue we're trying to solve for within the commercial class. These are actual customers within your system. This is a bill comparison, and as you can see, customer A, their annual use, that's the 100 cubic feet, and then customer B is about 10% higher in their use comparatively. The current bill, customer A is paying $113, something about what the residential are paying. Customer B, based on how they were classified, is paying the $7,000. And so you can see our 50% achievement in 2018, we're beginning to rectify this issue, and by 2022, when the uniform volume-based structure is in place and they're charged based on that use, then their bill is comparative to their use, and they're being charged equitably to each other within the class. Again, those bills are samples for 2022. We haven't looked at your revenue needs beyond the 2018 last year of the study period. So the question was asked, well, what do their rates look like? We can take a look at what some of these phased-in volume rates will look like with customer A and B. So again, you can see they do have a uniform base rate. They're both going to pay that $35.09. They're both going to get 8 CCF included. Customer A will pay 69 cents each CCF, and customer B would pay $12.26 per CCF in 2015. And if you look at those volume rates, they're converging, and as we get to the 2018 phased period, and where we've achieved 50% of our target, we're still at $2.21 for A, $9.16 for B. But you can see that in our phase-in in 2022, they will have a uniform rate. They will both pay the base rate, $63.27, and they will both pay $4.38 for each 100 cubic feet.
Excuse me, does both A and B use the same amount?
Their usage is very close. So 430 is the usage for customer A, that first column, and 475 is customer B's. So customer B is using about 10% more, and our target is that last year where their bill represents about 10% more, rather than that first column where they don't correlate.
Michelle?
Why does it have to converge so slowly? I mean, I know you don't want these huge things, but that seems really slow to me. Still, in 2018, a $7 differential.
It's an even phasing from 15 to 2022. The original, as Karen showed us, in last April, we came with one that accomplished it by 2018. And the feeling was with bill impacts that exceeded 1,000% and a few $1,000s, that wasn't acceptable, and that we wanted to look at something to mitigate those really far outliers.
But I mean, to me, it's like unacceptable that somebody's been carrying the load for who knows how long.
That is
you
the
know, and then
offset,
to give it this long duration to catch that other guy. I mean, he's not going to get repaid for the, amount of money that he was paying. I don't know. I mean, I know you can't make it totally drastic, but that seems pretty easy on the guy that hasn't been paying his share.
That's
for a
the
while.
challenge that the council faced back
Yeah.
when the council gave us the direction. I think the huge disparity in ups and downs at the time caused the council to give us direction to phase, as you see here. So we were responsive to that. As the group has done, the team has done initial analysis, I think this is the first time we've showed, maybe it's not, where we showed this like this, and you could really see. Now, this is I don't know if it is the most extreme case, but it is definitely exemplary of the bookends of this. There are many scenarios where what has to be corrected is not as significant as this. There are some outliers like this. The council could certainly say do it by 2018. It just means that as a class, commercial rates will have to go up that much more quickly than what this proposal would do. But we could be directed to do that. It's your
Can you
choice.
look at individual cases, though, or does this have to be uniformly applied for that customer A who's just gotten the shaft for however many years?
This is individualized. As you can see
Okay.
here on the second part of the table below, if you look at their volume charges, they're unique to each customer. I think what you're asking is, could we isolate
Most drastic.
the most drastic ones and accelerate the phase-in for the outliers, plus or minus, where the subsidy or the overpayment is drastic and significant, whereas others within some bandwidth, we phase in over a longer period. That's a legal question around notions of equity in this system. The legal advice that we've gotten to date, because we asked for advice about even doing this, where two like customers pay different volume charges over the course of a phase-in period until it dials into they're the same in 2022. The response we got, it's a rational basis, and it is a legitimate rational basis because you're working toward a target. If we expanded the uniqueness of the model to not only have individual flow rates over a 7-year period now, or 6.5 really, 6.5-year period, versus, and then have some outliers where there's a more dramatic phase-in. I haven't posed that question around notions of defensibility. We could pose it, and we'd have to decide how, where to draw the line, who gets 6.5 years and who only gets, say, 2 years or 3 years or whatever it would be.
Paul?
My memory is that there's a total of roughly 30 commercial customers, is that right?
170.
Oh,
30 are the ones
170.
we updated data for.
Oh, okay, okay. And if I remember, the rationale was, boy, you take a business and you say to them, okay, next year, we're gonna increase your water bill by a factor of 10. You've just closed the business. They won't be there next year. And we wanted to be a bit, I guess, I think there's a general feeling that the general health of the city depends upon having commercial businesses in the city. And to some degree, every commercial business depends on the other commercial business. There's some synergy there. So that if you start chasing out businesses, it hurts everybody, not just the business you chased out. So that we wanted to try and get this slow enough that we weren't chasing anybody out, is essentially what we were trying to do here. And I think it's a fair question, though, as to whether 2022 is too long.
What about splitting the difference, go to 2020?
I don't have a strong opinion one way or another on that.
Dave?
You've got to do what you've got to do. Either way, the chamber's going to fill up with people the way it did last time when we raised the water rates, and we extended that from 5 to 10 years. So it's a viable option. You mentioned earlier that you're going to provide in this study for two things that interest me. One is capital to do capital improvements, and the other is a capital reserve. Those were taken into account in coming up with this?
Yes, those were incorporated in the revenue requirement forecast portion for both the water and the sewer utilities. We had, discussions on financial policies and getting everything paid for that's been in your plan.
Even at 8 years, then, you're still taking into account the need for the capital reserve, to do capital improvements and the reserve.
It's currently modeled up through 2018, and so we haven't, because the current study period, I believe, when we started this, it was 2011. I think we went through 2011 through 15, then extended it to 18. And so the capital and the operating expenditures and the cash reserves are all planned for up through 2018. It would need to be updated to get it through to 2022.
I agree with Paul, with Paul's concern. We need to address devise a way to raise rates slower for the people who are heavily impacted. But I don't want to do it if it means sacrificing the capital for capital improvements and the capital reserve.
Yeah, so that we have not addressed. This is all, I would say, revenue neutral from the sewer utility standpoint. All of the needs of the sewer utility would be met. It's how you're collecting them from, whether it's residential or commercial, and which commercial customers. So, yeah.
What we're talking about here doesn't change any of that at all, and we wouldn't propose any changes to that. What we're really talking about here is taking, however millions of dollars that we bring in every year on the sewer side of the world, and making sure that it's as consistent as it can be from customer to customer. Not changing the dollar amount in total, but changing who gets charged what. That makes up that total.
Well, the dollar
So
amount's going to change over time. It's going to increase over time.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little
Small
bit.
amount.
Just want to make sure we've
But-
got those two things
not these
taken care
amounts.
of.
Yep, we do.
Those are
Currently
always gonna come
in
in.
the plan, taken care of.
That's right.
Now,
I suspect you're way ahead of me.
yeah, no, they're way ahead of us. One thing to keep in mind that kind of splits the discussion between Paul and Michelle, depending on what who the customer is, what their business is, that type of stuff, going through and over 3 years or over 4 years, moving them, basically, as we know, we've got some of those that are close to 1,000%, they're gonna go up. That could cause a significant burden on those businesses. What we don't know are how many businesses are at 7,000 now that are having a significant burden and may disappear where they really should be down at 2,000. So pick your poison, one or the other. I guarantee you, and we don't know who A and B are. You all know who A and B are. We don't know who they are. They're actual customers
actual
inside the city.
customers, yeah.
And I guarantee you that you know customer B, and they're going to love you for taking their sewer charges from 7,000 down to 2,000. I'd guarantee you, you also know customer A, who's gonna go from 113 to 1,835. They're not gonna like you so much. So there's no easy way to try and get in that and mitigate those, play with those, everything else, except to say, we need to set a policy that is as fair as possible for every user of our system and agree to that, and then begin moving to it. And that's
Right,
where we
yeah,
are
and
today.
so that's really, I mean, we're just kind of showing the ranges. That was one example. I know there's other questions we can hold on, or we can move through the rest of the presentation.
Well, I want to relay a conversation I had with a Washougal commercial business owner, or I thought she was at the time, and I said, there's some things coming that you may not like. And she said, well, that's okay, I sold my business, and moved on. But her comment to me was that, I'm glad to see they're finally getting around to that, because they understood that they're paying something way below what they should be paying. And so what I'd be curious to find out is what is this going to look like in comparison to other places these businesses might go, like Camas or Vancouver?
We have some
We
charts.
have that information.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, yeah, so we can certainly come back to, because this is the whole discussion, but maybe without seeing the second alternative, it
Right.
might not make your questions as clear.
It seems to me somebody's going to get hurt either way this
Oh, yeah.
goes. But equity of city policy seems to be the most important thing, so that everybody knows they're being treated equally, because obviously somebody here is carrying the burden. And I mean, that can close a business just as much as having a sewer rate raised.
And just one other comment on that. We can, as we look at just the impacts in the commercial side, where some are way underpaying, some are way overpaying, and then dial that in until, there's some that already are right. And there's charts that'll follow that kind of look like this, that will give you a feel for that spread.
How many are-
Not many of these outliers. So it's a very serious, like, oh my goodness, look at this. But then you realize, oh, that's 5% of the commercial customers we're talking about, whereas the bulk on this histogram, you can see the bulk are more in the middle. But one thing to keep in mind is, whatever speed you move to this equity, it's not just within the commercial class and fairness between commercial. It's fairness to all of the residential ratepayers who are subsidizing
Commercial.
as a class, subsidizing commercial. There may be
Significant.
individual circumstances where they're not subsidizing the commercial because they're overpaying, like, say, customer B. Customer B is actually kind of subsidizing everybody, but we isolate it into the classes. So when you think about, wow, 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 commercial customers, way underpaying, way overpaying, think of, I don't know how many single-family dwelling customers we have for sewers.
Roughly
40. Several thousand. That is a large rate-paying constituency to whom we're trying to bring equity. And in this case, it brings the sewer portion of their bill down over time. And I think that's very important to remember and not.
That's why I'd be in favor of option 2, where they are at 0%, the increase, that they shouldn't carry
Right.
any of that 4%
And I think
increase.
you'll see that's where
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
let's-
where this heads.
Yeah,
let's
we-
move along and get to
We'll
option
have the
two.
illustration
Yeah,
of
yeah.
those things included. And so, as it was stated, stole my thunder here a little bit, I wanted to point out that, yes, in the center there, you see the bulk of the customers are at the just over, just under, within $100 of a bill change over the period to 2018. It was important to show that it's a small amount of these outliers, but we did want to pick, and it's true, those are bookends, but we wanted to illustrate the issue the best way we could of that equity issue. But for most customers, it's not going to be that
Drastic.
extreme in movement. So option 2, this is where, what was just alluded to, holding the residential classes constant so that we don't at least move away from the cost of service recommendation, and then commercial picking it up. It's interesting to note, if you look at that far right column, that the 2% or the 4% in both the single family and multifamily, single family is a very large class, and when commercial, very much smaller, picks it up, they end up with a cumulative of 42% at the end of the period to cover all of the revenue increase for the sewer utility to meet those revenue needs, whereas within residential, that was 4%. And so we begin the phase-in, again in 2015, 2%, 2%, and then we pick up in the 17% for commercial. That's where residential and single-family and multifamily are not increasing, and commercial picks that up. So again, your system-wide rate increase is the 4%. You're collecting everything you need for your revenue needs. The residential classes are not going up, and commercial is absorbing the revenue increase.
Relate that to 98%.
Oh, so if you remember back, the recommended commercial change to be equitable in their collection was 98%. And so 42% is significant movement towards achieving that cost of service, which you've set aside for the next study period. But if you choose option 2, you'll be further along moving towards that 98%. And so the proposed sewer rates, if you chose option 2, again, the non-commercial classes above the line, those now don't change. The $113 for residential is maintained through 2018. Commercial, again, achieves 50% of the structure phase-in. And so still, again, at 2018, each customer will still be paying a unique volume rate until 2022 in both scenarios. And so in 2018, that $61.85 is uniform, will be applied to each account. It's higher than option 1, and the $5.99 is a system average. But as you saw on that sample bill, folks will pay significantly more and they'll pay significantly less, and some will be paying right at that average. And so again, that bill chart showing the distribution, obviously with the 42% increase, we've got our large group moving into the $0 to $100 range rather than also having a large bar in the moving down $100 range. Again, most customers are in that center grouping, 76%, and then our outliers, they do move up. There are fewer in the decrease range and more going up into the outer increase.
These are just commercial.
Yes, just commercial.
Residential's flat.
Okay.
In option 2, residential does not see an increase through 2018, and then depending upon the update in 2018 to the revenue needs, potentially it's the same sort of scenario out through 22. We just don't know for sure, so we don't want to say that. But it's very, very moderating over time to the residential bill because the sewer stays flat. And, 7 years into the future, it doesn't even receive an inflationary increase. But that brings equity.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a comparison. The question was asked, and what are some of your neighboring jurisdictions doing? And this was mostly to look at structure. Are most of them doing volume-based sewer? And you can see that there are just 3 there. Ridgefield, La Center, and Clark Regional have a fixed flat rate similar to the structure you have now, and the others have a volume-based sewer rate such as we're proposing for you. And there's a bi-monthly fixed fee in that first column, and then we note the basis so you can identify which ones are per account and which are the assigned flat rate. And then there's a volume charge in the next column, and important to note with those two is that some have an allowance. I noted that the proposed allowance, we're also phasing it in, but 2015 it would be 800 cubic feet. You can see the Washougal option 1 and 2 are the second from the bottom down there. And then comparatively, Kelso has an 1,100 cubic feet allowance, and there's no allowance in Longview and Camas and Battleground.
Why didn't you look at Vancouver?
That wasn't on the list that we looked at, but
It's a bigger city, but as far as a place where competitors might go, or might be, or not competitors, but our uses might be attracted to for an alternative location. That's one place I think they'd look at.
we can check and see what their structure is and let you know.
I'm not sure what they do.
Probably the most
sewer.
likely place they'd go, I think. And that and Camas.
So the box below there was a way to compare these since commercial varies so much in size of customer and type of use and amount. And so what we did is we just said, what is the equivalent base charge at the 800 cubic feet that's included in the allowance for these cities? And so you can see the Washougal options are down there at the bottom, the 35s. Partly that's because the cost of service is not included in there, and with this doesn't have the 42%. This is based on option 1, which is the 4% across the board that doesn't consider cost of service.
So this is what would be hoped for in 2022 then? That we would go to?
We're looking at 2015, so these are the
Oh, okay.
current rates for these jurisdictions, and then the mid-year recommended Washougal sewer rates.
So you could extrapolate in your mind a little bit. This is illustrative of part of the problem statement, and it shows, it's easy for us to say, oh, in our own system, residential and multifamily, all of the residential is subsidizing commercial, and then you have the stuff inside the commercial. But as class is subsidized, residential is subsidizing commercial, we ask the question of ourselves, that's nice, I mean, that's our issue, but how does our commercial compare broadly to some other places? And we included the ones that we included. There was no reason to exclude Vancouver per se. And this does two things. One, it shows it's hard to get apples to apples because there's about 4 different ways folks are doing here, subsets of different ways. But you can see that the predominance is volume-based. And what you can see is right now today, for a business that uses 800 cubic feet in a bi-monthly period, we are dramatically lower in terms of what we charge everyone else. So now to extrapolate and answer the question, they need to basically double, right? It's 98%. To get all the way where they need to go, it's just rounded up to 100, they need to double. So if you doubled R2 there, you'd see it's about $70. And you get us closer to Battleground where they're at. Now, it'll go up a little bit more, just in terms of what our revenue needs are maybe to 2022. It begins to close the gap. I don't know if that's precise in terms of doubling these. I don't know if that's all linear and how that would work, but it's
Fairly
rough.
close.
You
Yeah.
could do cost of service in 1 year, and then that would be the case if it was adjusted, so you can
Right.
use that.
So if we did it, so if on January 1, 2016, we were done with the whole thing, huge swings for some, moderate swings for others over time, you would see where we would stack up on sewer. Very competitive still for commercial sewer. Now, the more water you use, it would depend on the volume charge rate.
What would the impact on the community be of doing that? As is phasing this out over this very long period of time?
Well, your residential, if we were to jump all the way on, so that on 1/1/16, say just for example, on 1/1/16, we do the whole deal, you would see decreases, you have to go to an earlier
Yeah,
slide.
Decreases in residential, we're going to go back all the way to the beginning. Probably make it easiest right here.
Single family would go down about 4.5%. There'd be a rate decrease for the sewer portion of the bill of 4.5%. Multifamily would go down almost 10%. And commercial, every commercial account, or the group of commercial would double up. Some would still go down, others would go up by 1,000%.
What
Those
kind of
one or
businesses
two.
would go up by 1,000%?
Where's the slide that shows our antiquated fixed rate structure? You can sort of discern from that.
How many
Right
are
there,
there?
Yeah.
And how big of an impact is it? How much of it is, I mean, can we, I guess the question that I'd be curious to know the answer to is, can we go ahead and give the residential customers their rate relief and the commercial customers who are, below are paying too much now, give them their rate relief and then phase in the other people? I know that would involve, some issues with our bonds and.
We would have to subsidize the revenue needs from another source, because overall, you would significantly reduce the revenue to the utility because
So I'm just, so this would be a significant.
it'd be hundreds of thousands of dollars
Okay.
we'd need, because there's that a slide that shows what we get from residential versus what we get from
Where is
commercial.
that? Where's that one we were
The
just looking
dollar
at?
amount one.
Just out of curiosity, what's the residential first unit in Camas or another
So it's slides.
We don't have that
City.
with us.
You
I
don't?
don't
Okay.
know off the top of our
And it
head.
is a little misleading because Camas has no utility tax, and our bills.
Ours embeds a utility tax.
Right.
Correct. You can see on this slide that single family brings in almost $3 million. That is the bulk of the revenue for our utility from operating charges. Commercial brings in 350 roughly. So if we were to reduce, if we were to go down from 2872 to 2744, and from 567 to 511, you can see that's about about $200,000 that we'd have to make up from other sources.
But if you raise commercial at the same, I mean, if you leveled out the commercial at the same time,
Then we wouldn't, that's right.
I mean, so it kept the amount of money the same,
Right.
it would just be hitting some harder than others.
Right. And the councilman's question was, don't phase in the decrease, give the decrease all at once to the residential class, which is the lion's share of the revenue. That's a great thing to do. It brings equity and fairness right away to the bulk of our ratepayers. However, there's a loss of revenue because of that.
I just want to give an idea about how big that loss of revenue is
200,000. It looks to be $200,000
in the first year,
In the first year,
then it
depending
would
on
drop.
how long you're gonna phase that.
and then it would drop.
And then it would drop over time, depending on how long you phased it. We do not have the capacity in the reserves to do that. We are meeting our underwriting requirements and industry best practice in the sewer utility. So that money would have to come from some other source. And the only one that I could think of would be general fund reserves. And we've been trying to not, recommend that to you, that we stay inside the utility for everything.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, but what I'm really, this is all a little bit vague to me in some ways. And what I mean by that is, I really want to know what businesses are going to have these 1,000% increases and how many of them there are. And 1,000% of a $70 bill is $700, and if it's a big business, that might not be that huge to them. I don't know.
So if we go way down again to, I think we answered all the questions.
I guess the money would be the same if you did it all at the same time, not phase in any of it. You just on January 1st.
Go into the
That would
That's
keep
right.
the money the same.
That's right.
And somebody's gonna be mad and somebody's gonna be, phew.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so it's just a question of how quickly do those reactions
Well,
occur.
okay, that's what I was wondering, though, why, what is the advantage of phasing that over such a long period of time when we know people are overpaid?
At the time we received the feedback from the group, I'm trying to remember some of the rationale in the conversation, but I think there were concerns about the few customers in the commercial side who would see such dramatic increases, and was that appropriate public policy, given how long we've had this disparity? It's decades of disparity. Is a 6 or 7 or an 8-year phase-in unreasonable in light of that? There is no right answer to that. That is purely a public policy question around correcting something that's been out of whack for quite some time. Is how quickly do you want to do that based on its impacts? And the collective direction of this group at the last time we checked in was a little bit more caution in terms of the phase-in. As you begin to see the other side of that, I'm sensing a little bit of, well, depending on what that really is, specifically, maybe we don't have to phase in so long.
Well, it's a lot of disparity there, that's the thing. I mean, a few $100s is one thing.
Right.
Thousands of dollars on a business is another thing. And like Brent says, when we don't know the business, it's,
Keep in mind, there's very few of those.
Yeah.
Most of them are in the 100.
Yeah, so
Right.
so we pulled up the latest spread.
Right.
This is option 2, and this is dollars instead of percentages.
So 5%, the top 3 rows, 5% of 170
70.
is 8 or 9 customers. So just say,
8.5.
so there are 9
There you go. I'm like,
accounts.
how'd you do
No,
that?
I can't do that in my head.
There are 9 customer accounts who by 2018 will see a bi-monthly increase of $600 or more. 9 accounts.
And if they're paying, what are they paying now? I mean, if they're paying 6,000 now, I mean, that's 10%. If they're paying
So there'd be
200 now.
there'd be a subset within that group.
Yeah.
But you could also see someone in, say, they're going up $200 to $300. There's only 2% of those, 2%. So that's a very low, that's not even a handful of customers. But that could be like, they're paying they're paying
3.4.
$10 right now. They're paying 10, and then they'd be paying 200. That doesn't sound so bad. On a percentage basis, it's like, oh my gosh, this is hundreds of percent of an increase. But when you look at it, they're paying $10, they're going to pay $200. And a house pays 113, I think you could look them in the face and say, yeah, that's fair. So yes, it is true, for a very small subset, this phase-in has been designed to mitigate that. It does. That's what it is.
Well,
I think when we thought about this, we did not have these kinds of graphs. And so what we were concerned about is, I think it's all too easy to think of a business as an island, this business. But the fact is that having more restaurants in Washougal is probably better for all of the restaurants.
Just print that off.
Because now you can, and certainly we've thought in the past that having more kind of craft brewery stuff was better because people then think, oh, I could go to Washougal for that, instead of, if you've got one, it never occurs to somebody that that's going to happen. So there's a relationship here that's a bit more complicated. It's not just individuals. And so I think that's what we were thinking, but if you take those percentages of 170, those numbers at the top and the bottom of the graph are quite small. And as I think it was Brent pointed out, we have no idea whether that 2% increase for those two people who are seeing $1,000 or $2,000 a month increase are already paying $10,000 or $12,000, or are they paying $100? We don't have any idea what those businesses are.
We have that information, we just didn't distill it out.
Okay.
Well, I can see why you wouldn't really want to discuss it.
I don't think it would be
Yeah.
healthy.
Yeah, we didn't want
We
to.
didn't bring you a list of 170 businesses.
But the only thing
We
I'd
have
ask
that.
you is, have you done any outreach to them? Gone with your hat in hand and say, we're really sorry about this?
We wanted to first have some policy direction from the council about phase-in timing before we went to a business and told them something that would end up changing. So our idea is that once we get some direction with the council considering at the macro level, policy level, get that policy level direction, then we will go and talk to stakeholders that are commercial ratepayers on the periphery. We'll probably go out and give some good news as part of that, but I think our primary focus would be the bad news, to give them bad news.
One
The
interesting.
majority of people would be getting good news, I would think. There's
nope.
only going to be
Nope.
so
76.
single residential would be
You've got-
getting good news.
Right, this would be commercial
Well,
people.
Commercial,
The
yeah,
commercial, only 24% are going
Yeah.
to stay the same or go down.
yeah.
One interesting way to see this graph would be, rather than a dollar amount that is changed for each customer, the percentage of their bill that is changed. So if we have a customer who's already paying $10,000 a month and they go up $1,000, that's a 10% increase. And that's much easier to swallow than a 1,000% increase.
Someone going from 200 to 1,500
Yeah,
would be more of the kind of thing I'd be worried about.
yeah,
Well,
exactly.
there's at least one of those. I think that's customer A.
Yeah, customer A.
Customer A, right.
Okay, Joe?
We've done everything possible to help businesses be welcomed and be a business-friendly city since I've been on council, and that's been 3 1/3 of a year. 6.5 years after decades of mismanagement or poor, not focusing closely, that's nothing. I think we need to just keep looking to protect our businesses, while at the same time, our residents are gonna be thrilled. And it just works it in slowly, so I thought everyone else had spoken, I hadn't yet, but I think our businesses are a huge priority. We're always talking about sales tax, and that's the only way we get it. Our revenue needs to be increased, not run people out. I think 6.5 years is nothing in the big scheme of things. We've done it with our water rates.
Amen.
Yeah.
So we have just a couple more.
More slides.
Yeah, I mean, so-
Well, we're not gonna let you finish. We're just gonna keep talking and talking.
No, so that's what we're here for, right? So we've looked
You
at
mean
that.
we left you a slide or two where we didn't steal your thunder?
Okay, trailer parks, cost of service analysis. So this is another issue that is just, looking to, how and when that would be dealt with. So, as mentioned, trailer parks currently pay the same rate as a single-family residential class in the sewer utility. So they have their own classification called trailer parks. It has the same rate as a single-family residential, with the comment being that a more appropriate rate would be something similar to the multifamily rate. We did look at that back when we were looking at the cost of service analysis and looking at their usage based on the evaluation of the customer billing system, how they use the sewer system. In fact, the trailer parks do use the sewer system more similar to a multifamily residential than a single family. This is typical of what we find in the industry. Trailer parks are generally, they have master meters that serve several individual dwelling units, but on a per dwelling unit basis, when you're comparing them to a single-family resident, they use less water, they contribute less sewer to the system than a single family. So from a rate structure, best practice, it is most common and appropriate to have the trailer parks paying more of a multifamily rate. And we did model that when we were preparing the cost of service analysis, and that was reflected in the cost of service analysis results, where it shows residential going down 4.4%, multifamily going down just under 10, and commercial going up 98. All of that incorporated a change in classification for the mobile home parks. Now that our last two scenarios that we're looking at have deferred cost of service findings to the next study, that kind of dropped off of it. And so we're kind of reintroducing that here as to what the impact of that would be if we were to reclassify the trailer parks as a standalone without implementing the other cost of service shifts that we had presented. It would result in a loss of revenue for the sewer utility of about $50,000 on an annual basis. And so, how would, if the policy direction was to move in that direction, how would that $50,000 be recovered? And so just to give you some information, that would be a potential impact of somewhere between like 1 and 1.5% of an increase to all of the other customers, residential and commercial, to make up that $50,000 difference. So what we had originally been focusing on is with the change from our April presentation, where we had cost of service in there as options, and then moving forward to the current policy direction of our options 1 and 2, which were deferring cost of service. The thought at that point was that this recommendation would be deferred until the next study period. But again, we've brought it back up here as a consideration if you did want to implement this change sooner. Wanted to show you what that impact would be to the other customer classes. So this 1.5 to 1.5% increase would be in addition, for example, if you wanted to move forward with option 2, where we had commercial increasing that 42%, they would also need to increase the 1.5%, as would all your residential customers. So that's kind of the overall impact of that. And so finally, just to kind of summarize all the pieces that we've talked to today and bringing that kind of back together, residential customers, both single family and multifamily, are subsidizing the commercial class as a whole. Within the commercial class, some customers are paying less than cost of service and some are paying more than cost of service. That's that wide disparity issue we've discussed. The trailer parks pay the same as a single-family residential sewer rate. The analysis does indicate that it would be more equitable for them to pay a multifamily rate. And then we've brought forward alternative phase-in strategies that are presented to help improve the customer equity issues over time. The current options brought forward today are uniform rate increases of the 4% cumulative for all customer classes and phase in the commercial rate structure to 50% by 2018. 2022, making the full improvement to the rate structure. Or the second option was having no residential increases, commercial rate structure change at 50%. And again, so that's kind of the summary of what we brought forward today, the issues to kind of think about, and based on discussions with staff, bringing forward the recommendation is to adopt option 2 rate schedule for 2015 to 18. So that's the one where the residential rates are not being increased. Perform a rate study update in mid-2018 for the next rate study period, where we would be looking at updating the revenue needs for at least 2019 to 2022, and perhaps a 5-year rate study period, reclassifying the trailer parks to a multifamily class and charging them more similar to the multifamily. And then also just updating and incorporating all of the cost of service results at that time, which would be the reduction to residential and the increase in cost of service to commercial, and completing that commercial rate structure phase and strategy by 2022. So that wraps up our presentation.
Rachel?
So you haven't spoken of what rate you would recommend after 2022 to get the other 50% from commercial. How quickly do you think that would need to go?
That would happen between 18 and 22.
Yeah, we would have to do an update to the rate analysis. The current study period ends at 2018.
Sorry. So from 19 to 22, it brings it up to 100%.
Yes, that would be the plan. That would be the plan. Mm-hmm.
We just don't have the exact rates for 19, 20, 21, and 22 yet, because we have to update our revenue needs in 18. It's a little bit far to forecast.
Right.
We usually try to forecast 5-year windows. Now, we're in the middle of a current 5-year window. We don't really want to do a full rate study again that closely on the heels of the one that we already did. So this is phasing in these inequities. Then we do a full-on study again in 18. We'll continue to phase in the inequities, but we'll just know if our revenue needs have changed and whether that would affect the rates.
Right.
So the reclassification of the trailer parks would not be updated until mid-2018?
That was the original kind of thought process and direction that we were going. Again, we brought it back up again today for discussion and just implement. If you chose to do that sooner, it would just change what the 2 proposals were that were brought forward today.
By 1 to
1.5%.
Marginal, but we have to make up the $50,000, so we'd have to change what we were showing you for that.
The inequities and all this are bothering me, and I need to...
Well, that's what I was going to say. We have these inequities. They've been going on for years. We're going to correct them. Well, we'll do 50% one year and 50% the next year. We're still going to have some inequities, but it's only going to be half as bad. And then if we do the other way and doing it in 2022, we're going to fix these inequities, but it's only going to be 25%. We're going to improve it by 25% first year. We're still going to be inequitable for the 75%. And then it's just going to, no, I would go with option 2. It's legally defensible. And when you stretch it out, maybe some of these ratepayers might decide you're not fixing it quick enough for me, and they might be looking at legal action.
And that's a conversation that we had, right? If you recall, see, I think the bookends of your policy direction for us are just jump in the pool right away and do it January 1, 2016, everything. Get it over with, and then just update. Then we're just into a cycle of updating the rate study every 5 years for revenue needs based on bonding and, our projects and growth and, things that change. Or there's kind of don't do anything and leave the inequities, which has been, I think, a punt in decision-making in the past. And you can understand, and our team here shared with us, this community is not alone in punting that, because it just feels so, oh my goodness, it feels so big to do, so you don't. I think this council is saying, no, we're not going to punt that anymore. We're going to do it. In between, there's how long do you want to take?
Yeah.
And then also, do you want to jump right away on the trailer park question? I think we could. I think that's a marginal delta or marginal change to the whole thing. We would prefer, I can tell you from a purely administrative perspective, we're going to be maintaining unique volume charge rates for 170 customers, and every year we're going to have to go into the system and enter in 170 unique volume charges to unique customer accounts. New businesses that come in will pay the average right out of the gate. They won't have to get changed, as opposed to one change for the whole group. If we can only do that 5 years, that's better than doing it 8 years. 2 years, better than 5 years. January 1st, never have to do it. So that would be your finance team, right? And that's the impact there. We can deal with that. We can work with that. It's workload. We'll do it. Because I think there's some equity concerns or some phase-in. I think some phase-in is reasonable.
It doesn't seem to me, or it does seem to me, no matter how we do it, we are going to make somebody mad. I mean, there's going to be problems out there, whether we drag it out or do it fast. It's like...
I think a business owner anticipates it. And like you said, the one that you spoke with was kind of glad that it
She got by.
happened,
Well,
was
she
kind of
knew she was getting
surprised.
by.
Yeah, they're aware. They do numbers.
Isn't
they
that where we
track.
get the big bucks?
Yeah.
You're right.
Ironic it's filing week, isn't it? Paul?
If it were me, I think at this point, what I would really like to see is that chart that I mentioned about, okay, this number, what percentage of their bill does their bill change, not the dollar amount does it change. And if that looked pretty reasonable, pretty flat in a way, then I would personally say do the manufactured housing developments sooner rather than later. And I would hope to phase in before 22, have a full phase in before 22. Whether you can do it by 18 depends on what that chart looks like. Yeah, I don't feel good about stretching it out to 22.
Well, if you, go ahead. Can I joke? Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to ask ask you to clarify what you meant by some would sue. I didn't track with you on that.
I'd rather not talk about that.
Yeah.
But you did,
You-
so it
well,
created
You could,
questions here.
let's not talk about it anymore, though.
Okay.
Try not to do that in open session. A consideration that you might have, and Karen, I don't know how long it would take you to bring this back, is to potentially look at trying to make your policy decisions now, phase them in so that everything is completed by the end of 2018. That gives you 3.5 years to do it. Go ahead and put the fix in as soon as reasonable following all of that for the trailer parks as well. No matter what, you absolutely can't punt this any longer.
Right.
You know, there's something to be said for, once you know when you've got the data that something's wrong, you don't continue to do wrong.
Right, exactly.
So, we're at that point.
Yeah.
Intentionally, we're at that point, and unfortunately, and you could see how detailed all of this analysis gets, and this is something that we wanted to bring back a couple of years ago, and it is such a large thing to do, to calculate, and to get right. It's taken that long to bring it back. But at this point, we need to fix those things that are in equity, regardless who they are and regardless what the dollar amounts are. The dollar amounts aren't what they should have been.
I know, it's
So, and that includes for the trailer parks as well.
Totally in favor of the trailer parks getting done quickly.
You've got to, yeah, I don't know about quickly, and don't take that wrong, Ron. I think everybody needs to share fairly in whatever policy decision you give as far as when the fixes get made. It needs to be, I would hate to have one class, I would hate to have one class get instant relief totally, while others are still waiting. And if we've got something that
You're
is
already
reasonable
putting
across the board,
huge burden on the certain commercial
Residential.
folks, and now you're adding the residential no increase, and then that kind of onto their,
I agree with that.
So just so I can clarify, are we speaking about what was presented at the April, which was scenario 2, which is phase into the cost of service shifts and the commercial change by 2018? That's, okay, that's,
I'm talking about what you would have at the end of 2000, or at the beginning or the end of 2022. When we talk about 22, are we talking about January 1, or are we talking about December 31 of 22? I don't know.
the
1-1.
1-1.
Right.
Okay.
That'd be the rate, that would be what would happen for that year.
So what I'm suggesting is look at that 98% by the end of 2018,
So make it 2019.
January 1, 2019.
Right,
Speed it up by
Right,
3 years.
exactly. Yep.
Add a year.
Hang on just a moment, Ron.
So it'd be 33, it'd be 33% that we would, instead of 25% relief per year under the 2022
It's going to
scenario.
be something less than 3.5 years, because you're
Right.
going to need some time to get it. We're not going to get it in place for
Right.
2 or 3 billings.
If we knew that exactly, we can bring an ordinance back. We would bring an ordinance back for workshop, so you could see the tables and everything. We always show you the ordinance in workshop. There'd be one more workshop, whether that be May 26th or June 8th, just depends on how long it takes to put that together.
Correctly.
Right, so you got like a June 8 adoption of an ordinance, or a June 22nd adoption of an ordinance, and probably an August 1 or September 1 implementation, depending upon what it would take for the team to implement it. And then off we would go. That's clear direction. We would need to know, what we haven't modeled and studied is some phase in on the multifamily to move them, on the mobile homes. It's sort of like you jump all the way. You
Yeah.
jump from single family all the way to multifamily, and you just pick a time to do it. We haven't looked at them having their own unique one in between the two for a phase-in period. That could be done. It just complicates the analysis a little bit. You got to make up for the lost revenue in the titration, but we could do that.
That's not something that, and it's your all decision, it's not something I need to die on my sword on. If there are extenuating circumstances why you wouldn't do that in a phased period as well, and it's going to generate a whole lot more work that nobody needs to do, then that may change my stance on that one. But I would think when we're trying to get to equity across the board, we want to do it as reasonable and as equitable as we can for everybody that we're affecting.
Well, I can't imagine $50,000 being very much of an issue in the whole number.
If we do everything at
21.5%.
one time, it kind of addresses itself within that. The issue was doing it outside of cost of service, where you
Right.
weren't going to be making the other changes. So if we're going to make all the changes, we'd probably just make all the changes, yeah.
Okay.
Seems fast.
It's not. This is 4 or 5 years coming. It's not fast at all. This is the final point. So the soup's almost ready.
Right.
The good news is, and again, it's going to be good news for a lot of people. It's going to be unfortunate news for a lot of people. For this body, though, whenever we get done with this in the next month, month and a half, 2 months, you will have fixed a major issue for so many of your folks in the community, and something that previous councils have not done. So, feel good about that side. Any other questions for Karen or for Courtney?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, Ron, if you've got something quick you want to pop out, we've got public comment again.
Okay.
And then for the council's benefit, I'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting. At that point, we'll take the Transportation Benefit District discussions up under the council meeting time.
Thank you very much. That is real educational, and I know your challenges and stuff, and I appreciate all of your volunteer hours and everything that you put into it. It's pretty tough. I was just thinking, as far as the classification, we are just an island, and we should be in the multifamily. And I'm all for phase in the multifamily. That's fine if we're, eventually getting towards equity, but we are kind of a special case as far as just classification, that if we could get that fixed, we'd really appreciate it.
And Ron, if you want to maybe, Karen, I don't know in your analysis, if you know, obviously Ron only owns one of the
Right.
trailer parks in the community.
Right.
If you know what portion of that 50,000 of difference in that type of stuff is that equates to his, if you can
His is
maybe get
about
that to him
30.
offline.
$20 a month per tenant, basically.
Okay, so you've had the,
160.
I just wanted you to have the conversations
Yes.
if you haven't, so you know what some of the implications are for you on the good side.
Yeah.
And just throwing out there, that 50,000 is a rough estimate. We do have to actually analyze that.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, with that, I'm sorry, Tom, Diana, anything? Okay, with that, we are adjourned until 7 o'clock. This meeting is adjourned. At 7 o'clock, we'll bring back the council meeting. It'll be weird. We'll figure out how that happens.